And we continue the news with Israel, as it's been 2 years since the deadly Hamas attack that left more than 1,000 Israelis dead and ignited the ongoing war in Gaza. As Israel marks the anniversary, fresh talks are underway in Egypt, raising cautious hopes for peace. Joining us now is our senior international correspondent and anchor, Afua Hagan. Afua, 2 years on from the October 7th attacks, this remains such a raw moment for Israelis. What's the mood? What has been the mood like there today as the country marks its anniversary?
Especially for those, for the relatives of those people who were killed on October the 7th, and for those who are still being held hostage within Gaza. 251 hostages were taken. 48 hostages remain within Gaza. 20 of those hostages are still alive. And the mood really within Israel has been one of grief, anger, a lot of unanswered questions. And like I said, it's not just an anniversary, it's a reminder that these people are still missing. So a really, really somber day in Israel, but also across the world, where you've had vigils in Berlin, in Washington as well, where you have former hostages and relatives of Israelis gathered outside the White House in Washington, D.C. I think that also shows how much people are really putting their trust in President Trump to try and bring those hostages home and ultimately end the continuing war in Gaza.
And we're also seeing fresh diplomatic movement as well, with talks in Egypt underway under a U.S.-led plan. How significant are these negotiations, and how realistic is a breakthrough now?
I mean, it looks like these particular negotiations, and, you know, a horrible coincidence that they're taking place on October 7th, the anniversary of those attacks. There seems to be some real momentum behind these negotiations and a real sense of positivity that perhaps this could be the turning point. These negotiations could be the ones that potentially bring the hostages home, and end the war. The talks are taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt under this US-led plan, the 20-point plan that was put together by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump a couple of weeks ago at the White House. The US Representative Steve Witkoff is heading to Sharm el-Sheikh this week, along with Jared Kushner. And we have been told that Hamas and Israel have agreed on the kind of agenda and mechanisms for the ongoing talks. So they're going to discuss ending the war, they're going to discuss prisoner and hostage exchange, Israeli withdrawal, humanitarian assistance, and post-war governance. That's what's on the agenda at the moment. Like I said, there's a cautious optimism that perhaps it could be days rather than weeks or months before we head into a ceasefire. But that is a very, very cautious optimism.
And after 2 years of a devastating conflict, what's the humanitarian picture in Gaza at this time?
Devastating conflict indeed, Judith. Over 67,000 people in Gaza have been killed by the war. That's according to the Hamas-run health authority that the UN believes is accurate. Alongside that, of course, you have millions and millions of people displaced. You have clean water is scarce. Aid access is still being very, very limited. According to the latest UN survey published in July, 78% of all buildings in Gaza, have been destroyed or damaged over the past 2 years. 88% of businesses and enterprise and 77% of roads have also been destroyed. So the humanitarian picture in Gaza is dire, to say the least.
Dire. And there's been strong international pressure on both sides. What role is the United States playing in pushing this latest ceasefire proposal forward?
Well, like I said, this is a US-led peace deal. It was done between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and of course, Hamas having to agree to elements of this deal as well. I also think it's significant that you had ex-hostages and relatives of hostages gathering outside the White House today, quietly sharing their grief for what has happened to their relatives. A lot of pressure and a lot of trust in President Trump and the White House, Steve Witkoff and the rest of his associates, that they can get this ceasefire deal done. President Trump pushing for it as well. You know, his rhetoric over the past sort of 48, 72 hours is that both sides should move quickly, and he's very hell-bent on insisting that this is going to be the 8th war that he has ended since his time in office. So yes, you know, like I said, a grim coincidence as well that these peace talks are taking place 2 years to the day since those attacks occurred on October 7th. A cautious optimism surrounds these talks, but it is a lot of pressure in this moment.
Lots of pressure indeed. Afua, many thanks for the insights. Many thanks for doing this. Senior international correspondent and anchor Afua Hagan.